afternoon. The easiest way to get smacked as a child is to be caught listening to adults when they're speaking without permission. And, well, I'm lucky I'm an adult now, so I can't be smacked. But I did that a lot when I was much younger. I did it mostly because I was a curious child. I had a lot of serious questions in my mind. And at that time, well, adults don't necessarily sit around with 10-year-olds and start discussing serious issues. I grew up in a fairly intellectual family. We have professors, we have PhDs in microbiology, in international relations. My mother, who is here, was director of academic planning at the University of Lagos. So you can imagine what the dinner table conversations were like. To top that up, I actually went to nursery school, primary school, and secondary school in the University of Lagos, and then ended up actually doing part of my undergraduate study in the University of Lagos. It's a university that I'm very proud of, as it celebrates 50 years of its existence, of doing a great job of producing good thinkers in our country. But very much like in Chimamanda's book, for those of you who have read it, Half of a Yellow Sun, there was a scene where Odenigbo was a university professor, and in the evenings, all his friends and the professors will come to their house, and they will engage in really feisty political debates about international relations, global politics, and things of that nature. That happened a great deal in our house, which is why I had my own spot where I would sit down and just listen to those conversations. Now, on this particular day, my uncle had come home with a bunch of friends. Of course, I quickly went and assumed my secret position. And as soon as I heard the glasses clinking, I knew the conversation was about to start. And I can never forget this. There was a gentleman with a strong baritone voice, and he said, "What about the Soviet Union? What about the Soviet Union?" I thought to myself, what has the Scriptural Union done? They just want to get people to heaven. I was 10 years old. I didn't know what the Soviet Union was. But it sounded really good, so I wrote it down. I went to school the next day and told my other 10-year-old friends, "Do you know about the Soviet Union?" But that wasn't the real point. It was the response that the person got. Somebody else asked, "What about the third world? What about the third world?" Now, I used to read a lot, so you can imagine I had a muscular imagination. So I thought to myself, there's a whole third world out there? And then not long before that, I'd actually seen a movie called The Planet of the Apes. Now, trying to be an intellectual, well, surrounded by them, I analyzed and said to myself, well, that Planet of the Apes must be the third world. And you can therefore imagine my confusion, my consternation, and my devastation when I found out that that third world was you, me, us, and we didn't even look like apes. So of course I began to ask, well, is there a fourth world? They said no. Now, if you know how it was in school in those days, coming last was just not an option. So I said, are we last? They said, yes. I said, well, who is first? They said, the Western world. I said, why are they first? They said, because they have technology, they have infrastructure. Now, I did not need to be a university professor. I was just a kid. But I knew there was something fundamentally wrong in that analysis. There was no way I was going to accept to be last or third. As far as I understood from my little education, we all saw the same sun, we all had the same moon, and we all have the same red blood. So why should they be first, and why should we be last? Right there and then, even when I was young, I rejected that whole concept of being called the third world. And that's the very first point I want to make today, that if you do not define yourself, people will define you for yourself. And when people define you for yourself, one of the key things that happens is that definition itself might limit your potential and your ability to even dream, aspire, or even think of yourself as first world. So please agree with me, from now on, we're all first world. The second thing that happened is I started asking myself, who defines development? What is development about? Is it about roads, infrastructure, and things of that nature? Well, if that's the case, you can see a really nice building here. It's very well built. Next to it, you can see the security, the fences, barbed wires. And here is a nice, beautiful dining room where people can sit. You can see it's well ordered, and there are even numbers on the door. If that's the analysis of development that we had, then that should be development. But beside this is this, indignity. Beside that is this, And this. Is that development? I grew up in Lagos. I love the city. I hate the traffic, but I love the city because it taught me and prepared me to launch out into the world and see and be prepared, I beg your pardon, for what the world had to offer. It's a beautiful city now. Lagos is working. Fashola is working. Lagos is setting a trend for other cities across the world. It's beautiful by night, by day. You can see now we have bridges and roads, tall buildings, and a fantastic transport system. Is that development? You'll probably say so if you follow the first analysis. But beside this is this, and that, and this, and that, and that. Is that development, ladies and gentlemen? This I know you know only too well about. So the more I thought about it, I started asking, perhaps we need to rethink this whole concept of development. We can't necessarily be thinking of it just as roads and things of that nature. So I went back. You know, they say when things get too complicated, you go back to where you're coming from, back to the basics. And as a sociology student, University of Lagos, I went back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And as you can see in the hierarchy of needs, it's really talking about dignity. Psychological needs, air, water, food, shelter, safety and security, love and belongingness, self-esteem, self-actualization. It's really all about dignity. If we also look at the Millennium Development Goals, which we're all charging to try and achieve by 2015, eradicate poverty, gender equality, empower women, improve maternal health, ensure environmental sustainability, and things of that nature, again, it's all about dignity. So I started saying to myself, how do we begin to enter this discussion about development? Does development come before dignity, or does dignity come before development? Can you have one without the other? Should one produce the other? So I went on this whole sort of intellectual exercise. I think my career path and my educational process itself was fundamentally trying to reconcile these conflicts within myself. So when conferencing from Moscow to Congo, from Colombo to Hanover, from Nigeria to Greece, going to all these conferences, trying to say, what is this thing we call development? I didn't get my answers there. So I went on, did different degrees in different universities, and still things got a lot more complicated. All kinds of log frames, models, theories. And I thought to myself, this is not very complicated. It's actually quite simple. Ladies and gentlemen, fundamentally, irrespective of our race, religion, geographical location, or whatever the case may be, whether they call us first world, second world, third world, developing country, least developed country, fragile states, BRICS, or whatever it is that they call us, fundamentally, at the core of all our societies, what we're looking for is human dignity. And I began to think to myself that what if, just what if, we decided that we wouldn't just look at and try to measure dignity in terms of concrete and steel, or just in terms of gross domestic product, that we began to understand that dignity is about heart and soul. That fundamentally, a society itself should be able to provide its citizens a sense of dignity. And also to look at how does that society itself value the sense of dignity that its citizens have. If you look at that fundamental nexus between governance, security, and development, in the heart of it is the issue of dignity. But I started getting a bit excited about this concept because I thought to myself, what if? Just what if? What if in the private sector, the many of you here that run companies, you said to yourself, well, in my corporate social responsibility, in how I treat my workers, I will ask myself one question. Do I offer them dignity? In terms of the products or how I serve my customers, I will ask myself, do I help them to have dignity? For those of you in the civil society sector, in NGOs, look at your programs and your projects and say, are these projects about fundraising, or are they really about helping people to have dignity? And then in government. How exciting would it be if government sat and said, all our programs, all our projects, how we budget, how we implement, and how we execute will fundamentally focus on achieving one thing, giving our people dignity. Now, wouldn't that be something? And can you now imagine if government, civil society, and the private sector came together and decided our goal, our purpose, our objective is to give our people dignity? Wouldn't that change the whole concept of development, ladies and gentlemen? In my mind, the key indicator for trying to figure out what development really is for us to really step back and begin to appreciate what is most important. It's the sense of dignity we feel as human beings. In our country, we're fighting and struggling for human rights. We're trying to consolidate our democracy. We want probity, accountability, and transparency in government. We want to be sure that government is able to deliver for people, but people also want to be sure that they're able to deliver for their citizens. If we're able to step back and say to ourselves, as a people, whatever world they say you come from, as Nigerians, as Africans, or people from the developing regions, whatever you're called, if fundamentally we could all step back and agree on one thing, that instead of saying development in terms of material things, and we began to say we want to think of development as dignity, wouldn't that be a wonderful world? Ladies and gentlemen, my plea to you this evening is that we begin to rethink how we engage in the whole concept of development. When you go back to your offices, please ask yourselves, look at your policies, look at your products, look at your services. Does it offer dignity? When you go back to your organizations, look at what you're doing. How are you offering your society dignity? And for those in government, let's look at our policies and our programs. Are we offering people dignity? Because at the end of the day, there can't be development without dignity, and there can be no dignity without development. It needs to come hand in hand. So I thank you all very much, and please think of development as dignity.